compounding matters beyond measure is the fact that everyone that they care about who should be on their side and who should be sympathizing with them and putting their arms around them and being there for them is instead being weaponized against them through shunning, or being otherwise convinced that actually the problem isn't with this benign group that bothers people on a Saturday morning. No, it's with you as an individual for daring to change your mind about being in that group and for daring to leave. That's why it's wrong and frankly messed up to tell someone, why don't you move on? Isn't that what any bully or narcissist wants their victims to do? Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to the Attic. In this video, I will be revisiting another of my earliest videos. This is a video that I filmed over 10 years ago, and I figure, again, as I explained in a previous video, my channel's grown since then. There are people who won't have seen some of my earliest videos, and it's perhaps appropriate to revisit some of the stuff I've already said many years ago that some of my newer viewers won't have heard before. But I feel this particular subject that you'll have seen in the thumbnail perhaps, why don't you just move on? You hear it so much, and I continue to hear it in the comments from, random people commenting on the video. I think it's really something that's worth delving into again, don't you? Because it's actually quite a traumatizing thing, I think, to say to somebody. And just to be clear, it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses who say this. So I routinely get Jehovah's Witnesses watching my videos. Thanks, guys. Lovely to have you with us. And they clearly don't appreciate seeing their beloved organization, their beloved leaders, their beloved faith being subjected to any kind of criticism. And rather than dealing with the criticism itself or with the arguments that I'm making, they just dismiss everything as, oh, he's just a bitter, disgruntled former member. Why can't he just move on? Having decided that it's not for him, why does he need to open his mouth about this? How dare he explain his reasons for leaving and do so in a way that might be persuasive for other people? How dare he, And surely there's something wrong with him for him to fixate over our precious organization. So that can be the mindset, and obviously I may be exaggerating a little, but that can be the mindset of a Jehovah's Witness who tunes into this channel. But it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses who say this. You also might hear it from ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, people who have woken up years ago in some way, shape or form. They've distanced themselves from the organization. They've realized that it's wrong and in many cases abusive. And they've decided that it's not for them. And not only is it not for them, but they don't want to hear anything about it, which is obviously completely their right to make that decision, And who can blame them? Because it can be quite traumatic to revisit a source of perhaps personal trauma again and again and again, and hear this stuff from your childhood that perhaps messed you up and messed up your life. And I can understand people who say, you know what, I just don't want to think about it anymore. But then some of those people who do that go one step further and say to people like me and to my viewers, well, you should do the same. You should make the same decision that I've made, and you shouldn't even be thinking about this stuff or talking about it. Why don't you move on? So ironically, the ex-Jehovah's Witness ends up being on the same page or saying the same thing as the Jehovah's Witness. You could also have someone who's never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's say, for example, you are a spouse or a partner of an ex-Jehovah's Witness, or you're a friend of an ex-Jehovah's Witness, or maybe you are a psychologist and your client is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I can fully imagine scenarios in which such a person might say, well, why don't you just move on? Why are you talking about this? Why are you watching videos on YouTube about this? Why are you making YouTube videos about this? Why are you talking about this on social media? Don't you think you should move on? So interestingly, you can have people from very different backgrounds with very different biases all saying the same thing. And I guess my answer is, it's for each individual to decide whether they want to move on and whether they are at the point in their life, at the point in their journey where they are ready to move on and not talk about something or not research something anymore. But here's the thing with cults, with groups like Jehovah's Witnesses that dig into your life, that embed themselves so thoroughly to the point where they can estrange you from your family and do all sorts of damage in your personal relationships. I think that there is a danger sometimes when you experience all of that trauma and all of that abuse, quite frankly. There's a danger of slipping into denial when you say, oh, I'm going to move on. So you're not really moving on. You're just pretending to move on. I can fully imagine people just kind of sticking their heads in the sand and kind of going, la, 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 that didn't happen. I don't think that's genuinely moving on. I think that's being in denial. I think quite often when something traumatic happens, and I'm saying this as someone with no mental health credentials whatsoever, this is just my opinion, but I think when something traumatic happens to you, it's a healthy thing to understand what's been done to you and how it's been done and what impact it's had. And I think once you have fully absorbed what's happened to you and fully understood what's happened to you and the fact that it's still happening to other people, then you're in a much better place to, again, decide for yourself whether you want to move on and think about other things. And even when you do that, I don't think you should feel guilty if every now and then you want to just kind of stick your head around the door and just see what's going on with the dumpster fire that you left behind, you know? Again, I think all of this is healthy. It's a healthy thing. But what I think is toxic is when other people, for whatever reason, whether it's personal bias or some kind of inferiority complex or just some kind of emotional detachment. I think it's toxic when other people tell you what you should do and at what point you have moved on. I don't think that's helpful whatsoever. And the analogy I use in my older video that I filmed 10 years ago was that of someone who owes money. So I won't go through the whole thing in quite as much detail, but I worked out 10 years ago that if I had been paid for my work as a volunteer preacher for Jehovah's Witnesses, as a regular pioneer, according to the minimum wage, the organization, for all of the years that I'd pioneered, would owe me approximately $35,000. So I then went on and said, you know, imagine a family member or a friend comes to you and says, look, I urgently need $35,000, but don't worry, I can pay you back next week. I just really need this money now. So you pay them the money, you give them the money, and then a week goes by, maybe 2 weeks go by, a month goes by, and you've still not heard from them. So you speak to them and you say, yeah, you know, about that money, can I have it back, please? And they say, no, I'm not going to give you your money back. It's mine. And if you complain about it to anyone, I'm going to deny that I took the money, or I'm going to say that I did pay you back and you're now causing problems. And imagine they were so successful at manipulating people that they did actually succeed in convincing all of your family and friends that it was you that was in the wrong, that you did actually receive the money back and you're just lying. So not only do you have the problem of having lost all of that money, it's like the problem is compounded or made 10 times worse by suddenly everyone hating you for daring to speak up about it and daring to assert your boundaries and your rights. And that's the problem that's facing many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, is that they are an aggrieved party. You know, they have experienced, in some cases, massive emotional trauma, in some cases, physical or sexual trauma. And compounding matters, you know, beyond measure, is the fact that everyone that they care about who should be on their side and who should be sympathizing with them and putting their arms around them and being there for them is instead being weaponized against them through shunning, or being otherwise convinced that actually the problem isn't with this benign group that bothers people on a Saturday morning. No, it's with you as an individual for daring to change your mind about being in that group and for daring to leave. That's why it's wrong and frankly messed up to tell someone, you know, why don't you move on? Isn't that what any bully or narcissist wants their victims to do? Just, you know, move on. I've succeeded in pulling off this perfect crime, so you can just move on now, you know? Not how it works, I'm afraid. I think that people who have been victimized in any way, shape or form deserve, bare minimum, to be able to speak up about it, even if they, for whatever reason, can never get back what they lost. The bare minimum that they should be afforded is the space and time to not only process what they've done, what's happened to them, but to talk about it and to say, this isn't right, this is wrong, what's happened. And when I was watching my video from 10 years ago, I found the following clip quite interesting.
Anyone who says that you should just move on when an aggressor who has damaged you, who has taken something from you, continues to take things from others, continues to operate without any kind of punishment, without any kind of reprisals, without any kind of consequences, and does so under your very nose, influencing those that you love, so that on a daily basis you're reminded of what's been done to you. Anyone who says I should move on from that doesn't understand what Watchtower's doing, doesn't understand my situation, or if they do understand those things, they're being deeply insulting. So that would be my answer to anyone who says, well, you should just move on. You do realise that, don't you? No. Eventually I hope to reach a stage where I've made a contribution that I feel happy with, and I feel I can kind of back down a little bit. I do hope to reach that stage someday. I'm nowhere near it at the moment. But as of now, while I have the energy, while I have the time, while I have the willpower and the ability, this is what I'm doing. And if you don't like it, then tough.
So yeah, there's me from 10 years ago saying, if you want to shut me up, basically, good luck. But I've got lots more to say. And to a degree, I still feel that way. I still feel that fire in my belly, that total indignation at the unfathomable abuse that goes on with this organisation. And I might add that in that 10 years, since I said those words, I feel like I've learned so much more about how bad this situation is. I've seen how deep the rabbit hole goes, or at least as much as I can of how deep the rabbit hole goes, in terms of just how evil this organisation is and how calculated it is. But I've also seen, and this is again one of the most traumatizing things, I've seen how completely indifferent society is to solving the issue. I watched a film recently, Don't Look Up, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. And it's about some scientists who realize that a comet is about to hit Earth, and no one takes them seriously, or no one takes them seriously enough to try to do something to maybe stop the comet hitting Earth or warn people or whatever. And I couldn't help but feel like I could relate to those characters who were just being driven insane by the indifference of people around them, and the media being just so shallow and obsessed with mundanity, and governments just not prioritizing things properly. I've seen that for myself in the context of cults and Jehovah's Witnesses in the 10 years that I've been doing this activism, specifically when I was involved as a core participant for ICSA, for the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse in England and Wales. I devoted weeks and weeks of my life to writing copious evidence for that inquiry, explaining in detail how Jehovah's Witnesses were orchestrating an industrial scale cover-up of child abuse. You know, I left no stone unturned. I just laid everything out. And the inquiry in the end just did nothing. I think they came up with some idea of benches, park benches, where they would screw plates to commemorate victims. And they acknowledged that the two-witness rule was wrong. But that was about it. It was just a total farce. a total farce. And I was jumping up and down at the time that the results or the conclusions were published. And I was saying, what's happening here is the inquiry is itself making itself complicit in what's happening. By not doing something when they have the ability and the knowledge and the evidence to do something, they make themselves complicit in the abuse that's happening right now, every second. Because children are getting abused every second because of inaction by authorities. So my point is that in that 10 years since I said those words, I've seen truly how bad the problem is. And I'm reaching a point where it's taking its toll on me mentally and emotionally. I mean, I've had just so much nonsense to deal with in the years that I've been an activist. And at some point, I will need to walk away. And I'm certainly closer to walking away now than I was back then 10 years ago. But when I do walk away, when I do kind of make my last video, or when I do completely scale down to the point where I talk about it very, very rarely, that's going to be my decision, you know? I'll be the one making that call. It won't be because some random person online has said, you should just move on, you know? No one's going to tell me that. And I guess my point is, no one should tell you that either. You should decide for yourself if you have been traumatized by a cult-like group or a narcissistic group or individual. No one gets to tell you. No one gets to tell you to just move on. You move on in your own way and according to your own time scale. And once you have been able to fully absorb and process what's been done to you. And no one gets to say otherwise. I'm sorry. So I hope this video has been useful and helpful in some way. It's been quite cathartic, I feel, to get some of this stuff off my chest. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for similar videos. And as always, thank you for watching.